I'm glad that I have a place to come too. And, I find that even one new idea can change my life, or getting a little encouragement can carry me forward. We were just talking at Salesforce about the power of speech, because as I think I'll talk about in a minute, the yoga begins with the tongue, and I can prove that through the various statements in the yoga wisdom scriptures, that yoga begins with the tongue. And I had asked everybody there at Salesforce if they could remember a statement they had heard, words somebody had spoken to them that impacted their life, either positively or negatively, that stuck with them. And everybody raised their hand. And some people shared. I didn't ask everybody to share, but we got enough of a sample to see. And one woman said that a teacher of hers had, after she had done poorly on a test, had said, "Oh, don't worry, it's just a small thing." And she said, failure is the pillar of success, and you're going to do fine. And she got so empowered by that one statement that she said it sustained her career path and all the other progressive things she's done in her life. And so coming and hearing something that is intentionally meant to uplift you spiritually can really have a profound effect on life. In fact, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this monologue, or this discussion, that it's one of the main ways in which one advances in the practice of Bhakti Yoga is to have discussion among devotees. And you'll find that most of the scriptures that talk about Bhakti Yoga, for instance, the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, are discussions between devotees, among devotees. And some ask questions, some answer, and on it goes. And from there, great instructions come out. And those can be our guiding light. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes, Kishore Sham. Hare Krishna.
I like the way you have a way of taking fairly complex teachings from the Shastra and just bringing it into everyday sort of practical life. And I'm often kind of amazed by that. So, I mean, I like to hear you speak in general, but that's one of the things that I always look forward to is, you'll be speaking some very practical sort of wisdom and then relating it to the Shastra. Shastra kind of has a way of grounding it, and so I always like to hear that.
Okay, great. We'll try to do some of that.
I'm sure you will.
Anyone else? Like, when you first thought of coming down here tonight, what were you thinking?
Oh, too much rain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's easier to stay home sometimes, but you took the slog and made it over here. There's something about actually being in the location itself that makes a difference. Some people watch online, and that's nice too, but I notice when you're right there, sometimes you can pick up something. Okay, how about if I tell you some of the things that we talked about at Salesforce today, because I have some ideas that I gave them in a handout. And the first is, and this will be about how yoga begins with the tongue. So I found a quotation that I included in the outline to start off with: words are free, it's how you use them that may cost you. And I was thinking a lot when I found that quote about the power of speech and what it means to us. And I told you I'd prove that yoga, the tenets of yoga are that yoga begins with the tongue. So this is from Srimad Bhagavatam, one of the very important bhakti scriptures in the 11th canto. Quote, although one may conquer all of the other senses, as long as the tongue is not conquered, it cannot be said that one has controlled his senses. However, if one is able to control the tongue, then one is understood to be in full control of all the senses. So, a scripture called the Padma Purana says, Atashri Krishnamadi nabhaved grayam indriye sevun mukhi jivado swayamiva spuratyada. And this means that you can't see the Supreme with your material senses. However, if you do service, beginning with the tongue, then the Supreme will reveal Himself to you. So the statement is jiva adao. Adao means beginning with, to start with, and jiva means the tongue. So miraculously, the statement is very clear that you should start service, and by that service, then Krishna will reveal Himself to you, and you start with your tongue. So that's good evidence, isn't it? And also, in the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhu, I think the gain is just a tiny bit high here. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the 17th chapter, Lord Krishna talks about the austerities of the body, mind, and speech. And therein he says that he talks about speech being very important. And earlier in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asks a question of Krishna, and that is that how can I tell that somebody is in spiritual consciousness? And he wants to know how the person sits, walks, and also speaks. And in his commentary to that verse, Srila Prabhupada says that this is the most telling factor or revealing factor about one's consciousness, how one speaks. So he goes on to say, does Srila Prabhupada, that a fool is not revealed until he speaks. And there's an old saying that he had nothing to say, and then he said it. So the consciousness of a person is revealed by the speech. And actually, the Srimad Bhagavatam goes on to say in a very poetical way that if you meet somebody that has a pure heart, when that person speaks, the vibration is different. And here's the poetical part. Bhagavatam says that the vibration of that person's speech touches Krishna's lotus feet, and it mixes with saffron particles. Therefore, when you hear it, it has a different quality. It actually moves you and makes you want to engage in devotional service. So those are referred to as saffron mercy particles. And the quality of the vibration is different. So there's a common understanding in the Vedas and the Srimad Bhagavatam, and that is that sound carries consciousness, and speech carries consciousness. So what one person may say the same thing as another, but based on the advancement or lack thereof of the person speaking, will be affected by the speech accordingly. So the speech is very important. Now, as far as the practice goes, there are a few important points to understanding the tongue and its role in our lives. One is a way to remember what a powerful force our tongue is in yoga, and that is that our tongue is like the rudder. In fact, it's even shaped like a rudder. When I was a kid, my father had a little boat. He built it himself. It was called an El Toro, small sailboat. And he kept it at Lake Merritt in Oakland. And he'd take us sailing over there sometimes when we were kids. And I remember wondering what the rudder was good for. It was just such a small thing. It was near the back of the boat. And I pulled it out once. My father said, "No, pull it out and see." I said, "What is the use of this? Why do we need it?" And he said, "Pull it out, and why don't you find out?" And when we pulled the rudder out, we couldn't go straight. We couldn't go the way we wanted to go. We went all over the place. So, in a similar way, the tongue is like that. It seems somewhat insignificant compared to some of the larger limbs on the body, but it's instrumental in our lives in broadcasting what's in our consciousness, and of course tasting as well. It's another big function, and that's another part of yoga, which I'll go into in another time. But I'd like to just leave that impression with you about how your tongue is your rudder, and how you use it, and making sure that it's in place properly will direct you in the proper manner in the practice of bhakti, if you use your tongue properly. A statement I heard from a friend of mine who got it from his father, who used to instruct his son, that your word is your bond. Have you ever heard that? Your word is your bond? I always found that very helpful to remember. Whatever you say creates a kind of a bond. Can you think of any times in your life when you made a statement that bound you to something? What are general circumstances in which when we say something we're bound to it?
I do.
Yes! That's pretty good. And the reason I'm smiling is that's what was the first thing someone said at Salesforce too. Actually what he said, no, he was with some friends and they were laughing. I said, "No, what is it?" And he said, no, it's just kind of a joke. And I said, "What? What's the statement?" He said, "I do." And I said, "That's no joke." And I pointed out that actually it's a legal part of the marriage. It's legally binding. In fact, there has to be a witness there. I know I've done a lot of weddings here in California. And you have to have a witness, you have to have a priest, and you have to have a witness that watches the two people say, "I do." And then the person who's presiding over the wedding also has to say, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," or whatever the case may be. And then it becomes legal. The pronouncement has to be there. It's bound then by the words. And you'll find also in courts of law, if you're in a live court setting and there's a judgment in your favor, and the judge says, "Now you get $1 million," and bangs the gavel. Do you get $1 million? Say yes. Yes, you do. Because it's empowered speech, and it's binding. You're bound by the speech. For those who know the power of speech, you'll find throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is talking about histories that go back thousands, sometimes tens or hundreds of thousands of years, people are very careful about what they say, because once they say it, they're bound to keep their word. And so this is an important aspect of speech. Now, looking at it from another angle, one of our conditions here in this world is consideration that we're actually bound to the world. It's said we're engaged in the process of what's called samsara, or repeated birth and deaths. We're held into this cycle, or bound to it. And how does one become unbound from the material condition of life? Well, the Vedas, going to the Vedanta Sutra, which is a summary of the Upanishads, says anavriti shabdat, which means that by sound one becomes uncovered, unbound. So by one kind of sound you can become liberated. By another type of sound you become more bound to the world. This is one of the teachings of the Upanishads. Anyadevahor sambhavad, anyarahura sambhavad, iti shushumatiranam yenas tadvich chakshire. Which means one result is obtained by listening to material sound, and another result is obtained by listening to spiritual sound, or producing it, either way. So the quality of our speech and the quality of the speech we listen to will determine the quality of our lives. This is one of the great formulas given to us in the Vedic scriptures. Another metaphor for speech is that our words are like seeds, or our words are seeds. And whatever we speak has an effect. It goes out in the world, it's creative. And the words that we hear also implant themselves in our hearts and our minds, and gradually they have an effect on our lives. So it begins with hearing, and then we have thoughts, and our thoughts determine our actions, and our actions determine the direction we go in life, and what our destiny is ultimately. Everything starts from a subtle level and then becomes manifest in a more gross or tangible way. And therefore, being attentive to one's speech, controlling the tongue, is one of the vital aspects and the beginning, the fulcrum of power for those who are practicing yoga, the yoga of the tongue. If you can control the tongue, especially in speech, then your mind becomes more clear. You're able to witness how the Supreme Spirit is near you, is next to you, and instructing you. And you're not disturbed by superfluous thoughts because of controlling the tongue and speech. So those are a few seed thoughts, and I'd like to hear some reflections from you. Reflections are anything that you heard that stuck with you, that seemed helpful or interesting. You can just reflect it back, any of the concepts, or if you have a question that you think you could bring out some more information for clarification. First, try reflecting back anything that you heard so far. What did you hear?
I think of speaking as kind of like almost a contract or a commitment, and you want to say things that are true because in a sense you're kind of committing to that. So I feel, like sometimes I'll use a hyperbole or something, and then I'll feel like the reader may, or the listener may hear something that I don't intend, and so therefore I've actually kind of misled somebody, unintentionally. If it's not like, being obviously, sarcastic. So trying to strive for that precision of speech to kind of determine one's character, as opposed to being the kind of person who's fast and loose with dishonesty, I think. Which is kind of what I was thinking.
Yes, it's an important point, and one that I was just about to bring up also, and that is the austerities of speech. The first of, and these are listed in the Bhagavad Gita in the 17th chapter, 15th verse, where Krishna talks about the austerities of speech, and the first one is being truthful. So this has great implications for one's spiritual life. First of all, I'd like to come clean and tell you the first time I remember, probably wasn't the first time, but the first time I remember telling a lie. May I do that here in this assembly? We're here all amongst friends. Okay. I grew up with my parents and two brothers and a sister. I was closer to one of my brothers because he was near my age. The other ones were quite a bit older. And in our home in suburban Lafayette, my mother and father had an heirloom musical instrument. It was a bugle. The word was that it had been in the Civil War or something like that. It was a valuable piece. They had it displayed on the wall. And every once in a while, we could touch it, but never were we to take it down, what to speak of, take it in the backyard, which is what we did when my mother went to the store. So my brother Tom and I were back there playing with the bugle, and I think I was showing off like how cool I was that I could take it off the wall and take it in the backyard. And somehow, while we were playing, I totally forgot about it, and I just left it in the garden, like right in the flower bed, a priceless bugle. And so when my mother came home, she noticed it wasn't there. She went in the backyard, and she saw that it was planted in a flower bed. And she was fuming, and she said, who did this? And I was thinking, this is not going well so far. So I got to get out of this. And now, to give you more information, across the street from where we lived was my rascal friend, Denny Scardacci. And Denny was a real rascal, a bona fide, genuine rascal. He was always getting into trouble. And I knew my mother didn't really like him that much because he was such a troublemaker. So I figured I had the perfect thing to say when she asked who put the bugle here, because I didn't have anywhere else to go with this, so I said, Denny did it.